So my 4:30 show is when I tell King Arthur stories. And so far you've heard me sing some funny songs and some sweet poems. But these King Arthur stories, I believe they are the most significant thing that I do. I believe that through the ages, these stories have set examples of how we as people can be more noble, more righteous, more courageous in the face of wickedness to stand against it. And I believe that those themes are needed ever as they are now. Now, there are almost as many versions of King Arthur as there are tongues that speak of him. In fact, he is reborn anew in the hearts of all those who listen and love the themes of chivalry. But of all the versions of King Arthur that you can hear, I will have you know that mine are the truest because I was there. I'm Taliesin the Bard, and I was in Camelot, and I witnessed the deeds of Arthur Pendragon and his retinue of knights. So, knowing as I do these many tales, I will ask you, would you like to hear the story of Arthur's first battle as king? Would you like to hear the story of the Tournament of Love? Would you like to hear the story of Gareth's first quest? Or would you like to hear the story of Guinevere's first love? I could tell you also the story of how Lancelot was conceived. Or I could tell you the story of Arthur's origins as close as I know them, for truly only Merlin really knows. I could tell you the story of Merlin's origins. I could tell you the story of Lancelot defeating the Black Knight. I could tell you the story of Tristram and the Potion of Love. But of these stories, the ones that I think that you might enjoy the most would be either the story of Arthur's first battle as king, or Guinevere's first love, although I have been telling the story of Guinevere's first love a lot, and the Tournament of Love. So which of these tales do your hearts seek to hear?
The first one. Arthur's first battle as king.
Arthur's first battle as king?
Yeah.
Woo! Yes? Woo! All right. To set the context, I should let you know that these lands were once beholden unto glorious cultures. Many myriad and different were they. You could walk as though between worlds as you passed from place to place. Many different languages were spoken. Many different shades of skin color did commingle. Many different characters, both good and bad. But Rome came by legions. For many, many years did they besiege our lands. Until, after a time, it was the children of this land fighting against each other, some for Rome and some against it. In such a way, any meaning in the battle was lost and it became blind bloodshed. And for a time, much of this land was indeed conquered and forced under Roman rule and way. And you would think that would be the worst of it. Surely, it was far worse than it ever should have been. Strange, the purpose of this realm. And yet, it became even darker yet. When Rome, palsied in its own heart from its wickedness, did draw back its legions from the far corners of its empire, this land was left with neither reason nor rule. Every man with a castle called himself a king and did battle, forcing the people around him to fight and die in his name. What hardship there was fell even into greater rack and ruin. Farmers being attacked by wild beasts as they sought to farm in broad daylight. Hardly a patch of land to be tilled without bones being exhumed. Of all during that time, the children, the women, had the worst of it, as sadly they do in all times of treacherous villainy and wrongdoing. Brutal warlords rose up during that time, such as Vortigern, also known as Battle Lord, and Uther Pendragon, not Arthur, Uther, a villainous man who believed that strength was the only power that could unite the people. Cruelty, torture, fear, the only power that could maintain law. Uther Pendragon united the lands underneath his sword and had 12 vassal kings, the war dukes, to rule the parts of his kingdom underneath him. But he died without an heir to replace him. And I just want to say, it was really hilarious what happened, because, you see, Merlin, who was the most noble of his time, he had tricked Uther, partly with magic, partly with his, clever wit, into mistaking a sack of potatoes for a baby. And Uther died clutching the sack of potatoes, thinking that it was his greatest treasure in the world and his greatest accomplishment. And he died, and then Merlin laid upon him with such insults that the ages would have a puckered face to hear them. Merlin had been waiting quite a while to lay those insults onto Uther Pendragon, who died, despite being the king of all the kings, clutching a sack of potatoes like it was his greatest treasure. It was quite hilarious. But Merlin was sent by Uther Pendragon to go across the land and find a child who would grow to become the strongest in the land, and he did. And I cannot tell you, for I do not know the origins of this child, but he would grow to become the hero that we know and love, Arthur Pendragon. But in that time, while he was still growing, for 14 years, there was a treaty that none of the kings could make war upon each other until the new High King was announced by the sword and the stone. And when this strange and unknown peasant drew the sword from the stone, and all that was heard in that room of nobles was the ringing of its metal in the open air. Do you know what Arthur did first, as his first command as king?
What did he do?
He gave all womankind, all women, equal freedoms and rights as men. No longer would women be treated as lesser. No longer would they be sold for dowries into marriages against their will. No longer were they not allowed to practice any craft they wished. They could practice all the crafts, including the night craft. And you know the second thing that he did? His second decree. He abolished slavery, a reprehensible practice, and made free all those who had been bound, often from birth, to serve and toil for others, having the value of their labor stolen. And the third thing that he did, you know, he struck down the class system of feudalism and ordained that no longer would birth determine a person's future, but rather a person's merit could win them their fortunes, and all people could practice any trade that they sought. Now, because of this, the 12 war dukes that were supposed to serve Arthur as their new king, 11 of them swore to make war upon him and resist him instead. Only one king, King Ban, agreed to join Arthur that day. And so it was that in the castle's war room gathered Merlin, the knights of chivalry, King Ban and his generals, and the young King Arthur's foster brother Caius. They knew that an army was being rallied against them, but Arthur, who had called for them to receive his strategy, was nowhere to be found. Then, from outside the door, they heard a terrible noise coming closer. when in walked Arthur carrying a wildly struggling feral cat. Now, although he was covered in his own blood from this cat's scratches and bites, Arthur looked upon it as sweetly as though it was his own child. He then sealed the room with the door behind him and set the cat loose to run wildly amongst them. Many were scratched, but Caius, who kicked the cat as it drew close to him, was bit fiercely, and blood began blotting the wound. In his rage, Caius would have killed the cat had not the other stopped him. Finding no escape from the room, the cat chose a corner where it crouched, raising its hackles, wide-eyed, growling menacingly. Then Arthur chimed the room with his voice and asked, "Tell me, do you believe that this cat is an enemy or an ally?" What would you have said? Enemy? Ally? One of the knights of chivalry spoke first. He said, "This cat scratches at us, so surely it cannot be an ally. Yet the code of chivalry forbids us from making strife upon the vulnerable, so neither can we be the enemies of this harmless beast." "Harmless?" spat Caius, pointing at the blood still flowing from his wound. I'd just as soon return wound for wound and see if cats really do have 9 lives." The cat then returned Caius's comment with a comment of its own, staring him in the eyes and saying, King Ban then spoke. He said, "It seems to me that this cat's only ally is itself. Therefore, if we must be either, we are its enemies." And so Arthur went on to explain. Arthur said, "All the days of its life, this cat has known more suffering than we can imagine. Living wild and on its own, its experiences have taught it that its only allies are allies only when they gain from the allegiance. It has seen time and again that the strong oppress the weak. So because we are greater in numbers and size, it believes that we seek to harm it. How often have you disliked another merely because you believed that they disliked you? And when you were right, how often was their dislike for merely the same reason? Because we are chivalrous, we seek to uplift the whole world. And all of the damage this little one does against us is born of its misunderstanding of our good intent. It is its own ally, and we seek to uplift it. Therefore, we are its allies, even if it wrongly believes that we are at strife." At this, Caius curtly interrupted and said, "We've come here to prepare for a war, and you'd have us play with a cat? Do you really believe that this is the way of a king?" And to Caius, Merlin responded, chiding, saying, "Silence, Caius! Open your ears like you open your mouth, and even an adult like you can recognize that Arthur is proven by his words to be the rightful king." So Arthur continued to speak. "Those that come to fight against us are like this cat. It is only their own foolishness that they come to do battle against. They have lived their lives believing that none can set right the injustices of humanity, and they fear the consequences of us daring to try. So we must prove to them with triumph that virtue is an unstoppable sword, and innocence is an impassable shield. Yet how will they learn if they are slain? So I command you now as your king, that you seek to neither kill nor maim those who come to war against us, but rather to treat them as honored kinsmen who are merely too drunk to see that they are fighting their friends. Now, never before had such an outrageous comment been made in a council of war. And of course it caused an uproar, a sudden outcry of many voices. And this, startling the cat, it began darting to and fro again, running hither and thither, scratching and biting as it went. Now, this time, Caius, he tried to stomp on the cat. And the others had to grapple him fiercely to the ground to stop him. And the cat set upon his face, scratching it and biting it, causing Caius to roll on the ground, screaming, "Damn you, cat!" Now, above the tumult, the loudest voice came from one of King Ban's generals. He said, "Surely we will be outnumbered. We cannot afford to fight at a disadvantage. For the sake of mercy, that surely the enemy will not return." And so, Tanaquil, are you about to enter the stage to perform? No? Alright, okay. Normally I have a lot of time at the 4:30 show, I just want to make sure if something had changed. Anyway, King Ban's general was whining. He was saying, "We can't fight at a disadvantage for the sake of mercy." And to this, the chivalrous peasant known as Gareth, known by some as Pretty Hands. Different stories, perhaps you will hear them some other time. He said, "I believe you deserve to know what it is to fight at a disadvantaged knight. You knights have always had all the training and armaments of war, though you use us peasants as human shields, throwing us into the fray at front of the lines, though we have little skill in it. Why should you use our lives as such and still complain of your disadvantage in this court of chivalry?" And so the tumult was soothed as Arthur's voice rised again. "Gareth speaks a truth," he said. "It is the peasants that suffer most from war, and no doubt many, if not most, of those who come to fight against us merely wish to return safely home to their own lives. It has been seen by the wise of every age that heaven incurs its wrath upon those who perform wicked deeds. And to kill such men would be truly evil. Because we will fight for their sake more than their own kings do, I believe that their hearts will turn to join our cause in spirit. For we wish not to fight against them, but that they will see that we fight against enmity itself." And so it was that by Arthur's command, they began training in the methods they would use in the upcoming battle. How to fight mercifully, to disarm the enemy without wounding him grievously, to drive back and break formations while still allowing their retreat. And the cat, by Arthur's command, was ordered to be kept within the castle and treated as an honored ally. Now at first, this cat was reluctant to accept scraps of food thrown to it from a distance. But over time, it learned to draw closer to receive their sweet kindness. Amidst the seriousness of their looming battle, the cat brought them great comfort, and they learned to love each other. So it was that they named the cat Sir Maurice. Now once, upon being fed fine pieces of meat and cheese by the knights, Caius chided the other knight, saying, "Why for do you give this beast such nice victuals when it has mice and bugs aplenty to eat?" To which they replied, "Caius, because Maurice now knows us as an ally and a friend, because we have shared our bounty, though it profited us none. Would you consider us to be your ally if we hoarded meats and cheeses and fed you mice and bugs?" Soon after, the siege arrived. The war dukes besieging Arthur's castle feared leaving their kingdom vulnerable more than they feared Arthur's army of peasants and women and a smattering of a few knights. So they brought fewer legion than was expected, but still their number was thrice that of Arthur's. Their fury lashed hard against the castle, which struggled to hold against them. But Merlin, who had long prepared for these events, had already sent spies into the army of the Wardukes disguised as their soldiers to spread word of Arthur's good intention, of the laws of his kingdom that would make all people free and worthy and empowered, and how they were to be treated mercifully on the battlefield. At first it was considered a joke, but as the fighting waged, they realized that it was true. They were being treated with gentle, non-lethal force against those they had come to slay. And this caused such a transmutation of their hearts in most cases. They were so moved by the sentiment that many of them lost the vigor to fight against Arthur's forces with any strength at all. And the others, they fought without care or caution because they knew there was little chance of them being slain. And so it was that the battle began to favor Arthur's cause. But the Wardukes, cruel and villainous, they decided upon seeing this to stockade the castle, blockade the castle, preventing all food from entering or leaving, to wait for the supply within to dwindle to nothing. And it did. They became very hungry within the castle. So much so that at one point the knights caught Caius trying to kill and eat Morris the cat. Ooh. And although they chided him very fiercely for this, barely saving Morris from becoming a morsel, Caius only said, "It's better for a soldier to live and a cat to die than a cat to live and a soldier to die." Arthur realized that if they were to gain victory, they would have to leave the castle to fight, but no sooner had he rallied the resolves of his troops to do so than a fresh host of soldiers led by 3 more Wardukes arrived. And now, Arthur, seeing the spirit of his people broken, that they were hungry and beleaguered by this battle, decided that they must surrender. Some were disappointed, but many were relieved. And they watched from the ramparts as their messenger rode to the Warduke's encampment bearing the mark of surrender. And they watched as she was shot with arrows, and she died. As their messenger died, so did their hopes. Despair thickened within them, and most began to weep. Many cursed Arthur under their breath as he rallied them behind the gate to make their final charge. Their grief overflowed with tears and anguish moans, and no doubt most intended to flee instead of fight. But no sooner had the gate opened than a living flash of light darted between them and out of it. Morris the cat, shrieking more ferociously than he ever had in the war room, ran furiously not to escape, but to attack the Warduke's soldiers. And seeing this, Arthur's people, so overwhelmed with emotion, ignoring Arthur's command completely, began to charge, furiously screaming, joining Morris in the fray. Now the confusion caused by the cat disrupted the timing and aim of the archers, saving dozens of lives in the initial crash. And as the fighting seethed, sometimes Morris the cat could be seen scratching at the legs and biting at the groins of the Warduke soldiers. The soldiers of the Warduke said that although they withheld lethal blows, no soldiers had ever been as terrifying on the battlefield in all of the wars they had fought. It was as though hell itself had sent its most ferocious demons to drive them from the field. In the chaos and confusion, the spies of Merlin captured 3 of the enemy Wardukes, and the other 3, being unable to command their host, issued a full retreat, and all who didn't flee were fiercely beaten into surrender. and for Arthur's cause, the day was won! Soon after, as they were tending to the fields of injured and slain, Merlin came unto them, holding a shallow breathing and blood-soaked cat. And as they gathered around Morris, they could see from his wounds that although his tail had been cut off and one of his legs crushed, he continued to fight. And although they wept so dolefully for their friend, when Morris the cat saw his friends gathered around him again, through his one remaining eye, he purred his final breath. That evening, Morris the cat was interred in the castle cemetery where previously only kings and queens had been laid to rest. Arthur knighted him with the king-making sword from the stone before he was lowered, and Merlin took clippings of his hair to fashion into trinkets. They might remember him for more than his deeds. But Caius, who wept the most bewailingly of all, wanted to honor Morris the cat more. So he asked Merlin to fashion him a crest in the likeness of the cat. A crest that he wore proudly on his shield and his armor until the end of his days. And whenever anyone would ask him about it, he would wistfully retell the tale of how he once fought alongside Sir Morris, the bravest of all of King Arthur's knights. There you have the story of Arthur's first battle as king. I hope that it will inspire you to see that even the meekest among us can rally against tyranny and cause great change for the well-being of the people.